Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Japan Pavilion, and thank you for attending our event. At the final side event of COP27, timing is very last, but not at least. This event is unique and quite important for global decarbonization from our point of view. And my name is Takao Iba of Japan Automobile Manufacturer Association, and I am honored to be your host. JAMA has 14 member companies such as Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Suzuki, Mazda, Subaru, Mitsubishi, Daihatsu, Isuzu, Mitsubishi Fuso, UD Trucks, Hino Kawasaki, and Yamaha. And collectively, JAMA member companies are producing four-wheel vehicle, 8 to 10 million units a year in Japan. And also our overseas production volume is about double of that. So in total, 24 to 30 million units for wheel production a year. And also for two wheels, and globally, our member company are producing about 20 to 26 million units, sizable and amount. And we think we are one of the largest automotive manufacturers association. And our uniqueness is we are truly global and have a full lineup from two-wheel and small cars and ordinary passenger cars and luxury cars, van and truck and buses and etc. And actually many of European and American car companies are focusing on specific regional market, but we are truly global and doing business everywhere. And that means we are closer to customers in developing countries and emerging economies, such as in African countries. And as we are providing vehicle all over the world and paying close attention to customers across the globe, we know they are very diverse and living in very different and various circumstances. So we have strong sympathy with the concept of no one left behind in the SDGs. And we'd like to be side by side with our customers all over the world. And also JAMA member company has been pioneering mass-produced electrified vehicles such as Toyota Prius hybrid electric vehicle from 1997, or Nissan Leaf from 2010, and battery electric vehicle, and the Toyota Mirai and the fuel cell, and from 2014, and contributing to improve fuel efficiency and reducing pollutant emissions. Actually, in Japan, and the road transport sector's carbon dioxide emission has decreased by 23% comparing to that of the year 2001. This reduction margin is much larger than other G7 countries. In that sense, Japan is the leader in this field and carbon dioxide reduction in road transport sector. And the JAMA is supporting the Paris Agreement and its goal. About 2 years ago, we have announced that we will make utmost effort to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So to do that, we think we need to understand the issue correctly. Science-based latest knowledge and insights are quite essential. Just today, we are pleased to host this side event with distinguished speakers. So emission reduction path in the road transport sector toward carbon neutrality concept in the IPCC AR6 Assessment Report 6 is the theme of today's event. Today's objective is to have clear understanding on what current science views on road transport pathway toward 1.5-degree scenarios and what are scientifically uncertain now. And we are so inviting distinguished speakers and Professor Paulina Jaramillo, Carnegie Mellon University, United States. She is also coordinating lead author of the IPCC AR6 Working Group 3, Chapter 10, Transport. She is the one of authority about the latest science and understanding on road transport carbon dioxide emission reduction. And Dr. Keigo Akimoto is the lead author of Chapter 17, which deal with sustainable development. He is also expert of energy and environmental system analysis and policy analysis for climate change. And we also have from Europe, Mr. Yves van der Straten. He is the Secretary General of the International Organization of Motor Vehicle Manufacturers, OICA. And he has a long and a variety of experience in automotive sector and comprehensive insight. And lastly, not at least, and Professor Jun Arima of University Tokyo, he is also today's moderator. He is one of leaders of the chapter 1 of IPCC AR6. And he has long and deep experience and knowledge in climate change policy and negotiation, as well as energy policy area. So then I'd like to hand the microphone to Professor Arima. So his floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aiba-san, for a kind introduction. And my name is Jun Arima, the moderator of today's session. And as presented by Aiba-san, the purpose of this session is to have clear understanding on what are the current science-based views on road transport pathway towards 1.5 degrees Celsius scenarios. And now we have 4 prominent speakers as presented by Aiba-san. And the purpose of this discussion is to have some sort of dialogue between scientific community and industry. So first, we're going to listen to Scientific Circle, an outline of the latest scientific knowledge by IPCC AR6 Working Group 3 about road transport from Professor Paulina. And then the second IPCC AR6 view on the transport measures in terms of SDG, synergies, as well as trade-offs. Then we move on to the views from automotive industries from Europe and Japan. And then afterward, we will have explore such issues as importance of technology neutrality, view on total cost of ownership on electric vehicles, and also concerns of critical minerals and cost reduction potential of hydrogen and e-fuels, and sustainable biofuel supply potential, and so forth. So without further ado, let's start the presentation. First, I'll give the floor to Professor Paulina Jaramillo, and she's going to present the outline of the transport chapter. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming to the last session of the meeting. I'm Paulina Jaramillo. I'm a professor in the Department of Engineering and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon University, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was also a coordinating lead author for the transportation chapter of the Working 3 report. Before I begin, I want to make sure that it's clear that I was a CLA for the IPCC, but I'm not an official representative of the IPCC. And this presentation is my responsibility, although materials are from publicly available sources. So these currently the transportation sector accounts for about 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and most of those 70% are from personal vehicles and land-based transportation. However, emissions from shipping and aviation are the fastest growing source of emissions in any sector, with an expected growth of 2% annually. Right now, they're about aviation is about 12% of transport emissions and 11% of for shipping. So this growth could be significant in the coming decades. I'm going to start quoting text directly from the Summary for Policymakers. So this was one of the overall headline statements where we point out that mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector can be achieved through demand-side options and low greenhouse gas emissions. We also pointed out that these strategies can reduce emissions from developed countries and limit the growth of emissions in developing countries. So there is a bit of a differentiation there. And I want to show a figure from the report to highlight that. So this is from integrated assessment models. These are reductions or direct CO2 emissions from the transportation sector on a baseline of 2020. So anything above 1 means a growth in emission. Anything below 1 means reductions in emissions. And so I want to point out what happens in 2100. And these scenarios I've highlighted are the low emission scenarios that reach the 1.5 degree target with little or limited overshoot. And what we show is that most of the integrated assessments or all of the integrated assessment models suggest reductions in direct CO2 emissions in the transportation sector in developed countries. But when we look at Africa, the picture is very different. You look at Africa, the IAMs have a wide range of estimates of what emissions may be from the transportation sector. And these are emissions that are, the ones I highlighted again, are emissions that are consistent with the 1.5 or 2 degree target. And in some scenarios, you see emissions decreasing, but the larger range see an increase in emissions from the transportation sector in Africa. So the authors of the chapter were really eager to highlight the differences in developed and developing countries. So, but even these growth, that you're limiting the mitigation options would just limit. It's not like we would let emissions from Africa growth without constraints, is that these mechanisms can limit the growth rate of emissions. And so the chapter we identify both demand side options and technologies. So on the demand side, we talked about different mechanisms that are on the demand side, and I like to separate them in this way. So you have an iceberg where most of the iceberg is actually below the surface. So above the surface, we have behavioral change, which is individuals making decisions to avoid demand for transportation services. So moving less, shorter distances, or flying less, as well as a shift to more efficient modes. So from driving a personal car, to taking the bus. However, these demand-focused interventions also require systemic change. And these include changes in urban form, investments in transit and active transport infrastructure, even changes in the structure of the economy to reduce the need for transport, dematerialization of the economy. And these systemic changes are really important because they affect behavioral. So if you live in an area in a city that is very sparse, sprawl out, and there is no public transport, you don't actually have a choice to change your behavior. So if there are no options, you don't have a choice, then behavioral change is limited. So the estimates on how much can be mitigated by demand side strategies are very uncertain, and a lot more work is probably needed. But there's definitely a need to consider these strategies as part of the mitigation portfolio. On the technology side, there is this statement in the SPM that says electric vehicles powered by low emission electricity offer the largest decarbonization potential for land-based transport on a life cycle basis. And so there is a figure in the report that shows the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions for passenger vehicles. It has it for every mode, but this one specifically for passenger vehicles. And this is one of the things that forms the basis of the statement, where you see BEVs over here, battery electric vehicles powered with low carbon electricity, have the lowest emissions, even if you consider the emissions from manufacturing the vehicles, which are shown in the gray band in the lower side. And some of the other reasons is that it's considered the largest mitigation potential is that The technology is at high readiness levels, the costs are decreasing, and concerns are increasingly addressable. There are things that need to be happening. We need to increase investments in order to scale vehicle electrification, both in terms of building the grid capacity to support it, but also the infrastructure for users to be able to charge their vehicle. There is a lot of discussion going on related to materials needed for battery. And there is also a lot of work to try to understand how to manage those limitations. There are some of the things that are coming in line is diversifying the supply of these materials to reduce supply security risks, recycling materials. That is a big opportunity, but requires the investment in the infrastructure for recycling, and then using more efficient technologies. There's still a lot of development in technologies. Now, one of the other things we pointed out is electrification has primarily focused in passenger vehicles, and that's again accounts for 77% of emissions from the transport sector, and that's where the greatest opportunity for electrification is. There is still some advances that could support electrification of certain heavy-duty modes, but that really requires much more investment. Then the report also acknowledges that there may be some role for sustainable biofuels, low-emission hydrogen, and derivatives like synthetic hydrocarbons that can support the mitigation of CO2 emissions from land-based transportation. Again, they require production profits and improvements. The mitigation benefits we identified that the mitigation benefits of biofuels are particularly relevant in the short or medium term. And we noted that hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives can offer mitigation potential in some contexts and land-based transport. So there may be areas of the world where hydrogen is more appropriate even for the medium and land-based transport. I'm going the other way. So then we get into aviation and shipping, which was a big focus of the report. And I'm going to show again a figure from the fact sheet that shows us that while there's some efforts to, well, first of all, these chapters are growing rapidly and they're harder to decarbonize. There's options for efficiency improvements, whole design, but they will definitely need the alternative heavy liquid and dense fuels. And this is where hydrogen and derivatives really can play a role. Electrification of planes, maybe for very short planes and short trips, the same with ferries, but most likely there's going to be a need for liquid biofuels, low emission hydrogen, and synthetic fuels. To support the decarbonization of the shipping and aviation industry, there's going to be a need for improved governance structures, particularly as to address how to address emissions that are happening outside of countries' boundaries. A big question is whether the transportation sector will reach net zero. So most of the discussion around 1.5 degrees is that we need to reach net zero globally by the middle of the century. So the question is whether the transport sector needs to reach that level. And what the integrated assessment model suggests is that it is unlikely that the transport sector, including land-based transportation, shipping, and aviation, can reach net zero, which means there's going to likely be a need of counterbalancing residual emissions through carbon dioxide removal. And so that still means we have to really reduce emissions at significant levels, up to 70% to meet warming to 1.5, but it's not going to get net zero. Also, emissions will vary by region. As I noted earlier, while there might be a very large potential for reductions in developed countries, emissions could actually increase in some developing countries as population growth, economies growth, and demand for mobility services growth. And finally, it's really, really important that any transition to electricity or hydrogen be linked to a transition to low carbon electricity, as both electric vehicles and low carbon hydrogen really depend on the availability of low carbon sources of electricity. So those investments are really necessary. And I think one of the next speaker will be talking about the links between the transportation chapter and the sustainable development goals, but it's also worth pointing out that decarbonization of the transport sector offers other co-benefits, including improvements in air quality, reductions in health damages, even time savings as a result of congestion reductions, and access with investments of certain transportation modes will also increase equitable access to transportation services. And so with that, here's the citation for the chapter, but I will now pass it on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Paulina, for your comprehensive presentation. So please go back to your seat. And then now let's move on to the next speaker, Dr. Keigo Akimoto. And actually, he's going to talk about synergies and trade-offs in terms of SDGs of various transport measures. So, Dr. Akimoto, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Arima Sensei. And it is my great honor to be here. And thank you very much for JAMA to invite me. Okay, I'm Keigo Akimoto from Research Institute of Innovative Technology for the Earth. And I'm also a lead author of Chapter 17, Sustainable Development Chapter. So let's start. Okay. So first figure shows several, this is the IPCC AR6 SPM figures. This figure shows several opportunities to achieve carbon neutrality. As you can see here, five scenarios can be seen. Some scenarios have residue CO2 emissions, even if carbon neutrality is achieved. And also CDR technologies, carbon dioxide removal technologies, can offset some of the residue CO2 emissions. So carbon neutrality can be achieved. So several kinds of scenarios exist. So IPCC states the development of CDR to counterbalance how to abate residual emissions is unavoidable if net zero CO2 or GHG emissions are to be achieved. So this is an image of the carbon neutrality options for automobile fuels and from where to feed CO2 emissions. Left-hand side, the ICE emissions, and we have several kinds of options in the automobile. For example, hybrid electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, battery electric vehicles, and fuel cell electric vehicles. But all of the options can achieve carbon neutrality thanks to the CDR technologies or any other technologies. And also battery electric vehicles, CO2 emissions from electricity can be remained. So CDR technologies can offset of the emissions. So higher cost-effective measures should be implemented, considering all of the technologies to achieve the cost-efficient measures, and also for the sustainable development. So next, this is not IPCC report, but I'm IA integrated assessment modelers. So I'd like to show you some of the emission reduction scenarios to achieve 2 degrees scenarios and 1.5 scenarios. We have several scenarios for 2 degrees and 1.5. I would like to skip the explain detail, but for example, cost and potentials of variable renewable energy assumptions, and also price of passenger cars or for battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles option. And also we assume the different kinds of cost reduction scenarios for CDR technologies, as you can see here. So this is the number of automobile passengers cars scenarios. This is our model estimations, and you can see here hybrid electric vehicle and plug-in hybrid vehicles dominate the global scale of new passenger cars in all scenarios except renewable REN electric vehicle scenarios. That means lower renewable energy costs and lower electric vehicles, particularly of the battery cost is cheaper. The share of BEV in the total number of new car sales will reach around 90% in 2050 in the cheaper renewable and cheaper electric vehicle scenarios. But there are several kinds of opportunities to achieve carbon neutrality by using not only BEV, but also a plug-in hybrid and the hybrid system, and also FCV, thanks to CDR technologies, etc. So, and this is the final energy consumption in road transportation sector for different regions. Yellow color shows electricity consumption. Red color is fossil fuels, and green is for biofuels, and also you can see the hydrogen also. But you can, as you can see here, there are very different kinds of energy consumption across regions. For example, in Japan, electricity consumption is higher compared to the other countries because Japan is a shorter distance of the passenger travel, but other countries are longer passenger travel, and also different energy resources across countries. So let's talk about the synergies and trade-off of climate change mitigation. This is the main topic of my presentation. This figure shows is the figure SPM 8, and in principle, these, I would like to explain briefly for this figure. This is the mitigation measures is left-hand side, and the synergy and the trade-off impacts at the right-hand side. And the plus shows the synergy effects, and the minus shows the trade-off effects. And the dot marks shows both of the synergies and the trade-off. But in principle, these assessments was summarized from the underlying texts in the sectoral chapters, including qualitative assessments. So this is a very important point, not the quantitative analysis results. So there could be also other synergy or trade-offs. So also these synergies and trade-offs could be changed depending on the intensity options, such as the level of utilization of each technologies. So this is the synergies and trade-off of SDGs in transport sector. As you can see here, for example, electric light duty vehicles shows the both synergy and trade-off effect to SDG Sustainable Development Goal 3, for example. But in chapter 17, for example, these texts seen. For example, the mitigation options in the transportation sector are assessed as having synergies with SDG 1, no poverty, and SDG 3, good health and well-being due to reduced environmental pollution, with exceptions in relation to pollution from biofuels and the risks of traffic accidents. And also trade-offs are also mentioned in relation SDG 2, zero hunger, where the production of biofuels takes land away from food production. And the synergies are assessed in relation to SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, SDG 8, decent work and growth, economic growth, and SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Also, for example, for electric light duty vehicles impact on SDG 3, for synergies, BEVs have no tailpipe emissions, which further offsets the increased PM emissions from road and tire wear. For trade-off, BEVs are generally heavier than the ICEV counterparts, which may potentially cause higher stress on the road surfaces and tires, with consequently higher PM emissions per kilometer driven. And also, for example, for biofuels impact on SDG 3, for synergies, biofuels may also offer a significant advantage in meeting ambitious sulfur emission reduction targets set by the sectoral organizations. So let's conclude. Electrification is a key measure for achieving carbon neutrality. Shifts from ICE to EV also such as DACs and BECs, direct air capture and storage, bioenergy with CCS will contribute to offsetting the residual emissions of fossil fuels, also in the transport sector. In addition, synthetic fuels based on renewables will play a certain role to achieve carbon neutrality in transport sector. The assessments of total energy systems in energy supply, transport, and CDR are important for cost-effective emission reduction measures. BEV only will not be a dominant measure in the road transport sector. Several kinds of road transport measures have potential cost-effective reductions in different time points, different countries, and different perspectives in technologies. All of the options in the road transport sector could have not only synergy effects on SDGs, but also trade-off effects. Depending on countries, scales of deployments, different time points, and so on. Lower cost of emission reductions with consideration expect from options will be able to increase SDG 1, no poverty, and SDG 2, zero hunger, for example. While the IPCC AR6 had not assessed sufficiently, and therefore the balanced emissions reductions response measure toward carbon neutrality will be important also in road transport sector. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akimoto, for your comprehensive presentation. Now, let us turn to the voice of industry. So first, let us invite Mr. Yves van der Straten from International Organization of Motor Vehicle Manufacturers. So we are going to listen to his video recorded presentation.
Anyway, first of all, let me thank the organizers to allow me to present the global decarbonization framework, our strategy in a technology neutral approach. Basically, very recently, we issued a rather comprehensive framework with a couple of recommendations in order to support decarbonization of road transport. First of all, we confirm the commitment to contribute as much as possible to the decarbonization of road transport. But we also consider that no single government policy or single industry commitment alone will achieve this goal. We think we all must collaborate to identify the various approaches in order to cover all countries, because we simply do not believe in a policy of one size fits all. And I think that the previous presentations already very much go into that direction. When it comes to electricity, we are convinced indeed that in many of the largest the largest automotive markets, electrified vehicles will be crucial to reach the objectives. And globally, the auto industry is planning to invest more than $500 billion by 2030 for an electrified future. That includes battery vehicles, plug-in hybrids, fuel cells, and sales of electric cars, including plug-ins, have doubled in 2021 to a new record of about 6.6 million vehicles, and that trend is continuing. And the number of EVs on the road end of 2021 was about 16.5 million, which represents the triple of the amount in 2018. But sales are sometimes extremely different from one country to the other, and EVs represent only a fraction of the more than 1.4 billion vehicles on the road worldwide. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So in order to maximize the EV acceptance and adoption, we do believe that investments and policies will be necessary, and focusing on a number of varying factors. That includes the infrastructure, affordability, consumer acceptance, the issue of mineral resources, decarbonization of the electric grid, supply chains, etc. So plenty of factors that will need to be addressed in detail. And can we go to the next slide, please? So when it comes to charging and refueling, clearly investments, public and private, will be necessary to develop the infrastructure. And there was a study recently by Alex Partners indicating that about $300 billion would be required by 2030 in order to support the projected growth in EV park globally. And these charging needs will also vary substantially from country to country. In some, it will be home charging. In some others, it may be other demands when it comes to charging. All that will depend on the geography and on the demographics and maybe other factors as well. The next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So definitely when it comes to acceptance and affordability, we do believe that incentives will be necessary to encourage consumers to replace their vehicles with EV models. We should not forget that normally the complete replacement of existing fleets, that takes decades. And therefore, in order, because of the additional cost, they will need to be offset at least partly, and for that incentives will be necessary. Because otherwise, if consumers are forced, because of the cost, to keep their older vehicles longer than they should, then the net effect of electrification will simply be fully negative. Until now, the costs have been reduced, but we do believe that further investments will be necessary to realize the cost, utility, and convenience parity. In terms of simply said, an EV currently costs significantly more to produce than an ICE vehicle. And this difference even increases when you consider then convenience and utility, because in order to have the same range and recharging or refueling speed as an ICE, you will need much more powerful batteries, heavier, more expensive, etc. So, and these ranges, of course, are in line with consumer expectations in many nations. So, our conclusion is really for that is that simply saying we must strengthen fuel efficiency regulations and other regulations, that this will not be sufficient. There is a lot of R&D that will still be necessary in order to provide the EV owners the same cost benefits as those provided by ICEs, and in order to secure supply chains. And also, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles represent, we believe, an important technology, certainly for heavy-duty vehicles, and therefore also hydrogen should be priced at affordable levels and made more conveniently available to users. So we do think that support measures will be needed also in R&D for fuel cell and hydrogen storage, hydrogen production, station infrastructure development, and so on. The next slide, please. Wide-scale adoption of EVs, obviously that will require a substantial increase in demand for mineral resources. That means that we will also need to ensure responsible extraction and end-of-life policies to minimize environmental harm. There will be a big pressure on existing supply chains for critical materials, components, minerals, etc. Just to give an example, and by now my figures are probably already outdated, but it was recently estimated that global demand for lithium for EV batteries would reach 3 million tons by 2030. And I recently read that even a more recent figure of 4 million tons. So all that is to be seen in comparison with the 82,000 tons that were produced in 2020. And something like 300 new mines for graphite, lithium, nickel, cobalt would need to be built over the next decade to meet demands for EVs. And I'm not even talking about surging prices. Lithium price, for instance, in May of this year was 7 times higher than at the start of 2021. And again, I recently saw in the press that nowadays we are already at a factor of 10. Yes, thank you for changing the slide already. Electrification also will mean that we need decarbonization and upgrades of the electric grid. Because the grid and the power used to charge electric vehicles or to produce hydrogen should be clean, reliable, resilient, affordable, and compatible with the various charging needs. The next slide, please. So these are just the factors that we readily have identified, and we do believe that they all need to be considered for the electrification of the transport sector, because they are all important. And therefore, we do believe that in the near to medium term, full-scale electrification will be an important solution, but it will probably not be the most realistic or practical solution for many nations around the world. To give an example, Brazil, which is cited in our study, is the largest producer of sugarcane ethanol and the second largest soybean producer in the world. Brazil uses biofuels for the transport sector since many years. These emit lower, significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions. And in 2021, about 84% of new light vehicles sold in Brazil were flex fuel vehicles. And in contrast, EV sales are still very, very limited due to concerns of affordability, infrastructure, long distances to be traveled, limited size of the recharging grid, etc. All that results in a very wide-scale use of biofuels in the Brazilian strategy. And also a recent study in Japan, and that will be, I think, presented a little bit later on. There as well, it becomes clear that combination of electrification with carbon neutral fuels, synthetic biofuels, will also allow significant CO2 reductions. In addition to that, let's not forget that the use of low carbon or even carbon neutral fuels in ICE vehicles will reduce CO2 emissions from vehicles already on the road today, without having to wait for their replacement, which again, as I said, can be many, many, many years away from now. So therefore, the alternative fuels, low carbon, carbon neutral, synthetic, e-fuels, whatever, we do believe that this technology merits R&D and support. Because also in well-developed markets, during some years probably, a transition phase, and then more fuel-efficient ICE vehicles, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, also may offer good alternatives. Plug-ins, for instance, they offer zero-emission driving mode for daily use in urban, semi-urban environments, and a good range for long distances. And in addition to that, they do not need huge charging infrastructure investments. And last but not least, also hydrogen in ICE vehicles may possibly offer another viable alternative in some markets, especially probably for heavy vehicles and other specific use cases. Whether hydrogen is used in a fuel cell or in an ICE, the carbon emissions at the tailpipe are zero, just like a battery electric vehicle. So finally, some last considerations. A fuel electric vehicle will not emit CO2 while in use, clear. But CO2 will be emitted during the manufacture, the distribution, recycling, etc. So we do believe that a fair and internationally harmonized method to evaluate CO2 emissions will be necessary based on a life cycle analysis, because no solution will be really effective if the whole energy chain from well to wheel and even from cradle to grave is disregarded. So in conclusion, we are convinced of the need to collaborate at all levels of government, at all levels of industries, to identify the most suitable approaches, considering the economic, geographic, and cultural realities of the various individual nations around the world. We are committed to decarbonization of road transport. We do believe that electrification will play a leading role in this transition. But we also believe that today, at this stage, it is probably not the most appropriate single technology for all nations. So we believe in a technology neutral approach that this will offer the best solution, with individual countries able to implement sustainable, alternative or complementary measures tailored to their specific needs. We need comprehensive policies to promote the competitiveness of the auto industry, to decarbonize electric grids, and to ensure reliable infrastructure. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Yves, for your very much comprehensive presentation. So now, finally, let us give a floor to Mr. Takawa Iba from JAMA.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to explain the potentiality of multi-pathway approach toward carbon neutrality. And okay. And who we are, I just explained before. So we are the association composed of 14 automotive, our motorcycle manufacturers companies. And we are very global, and we are producing four-wheel car in Japan and exporting all over the world. And in case of some motorcycle or more significant, and producing globally, and also the production of Japan is exporting to all over the world. And actually, our company has a manufacturing plant all over the world, and we are truly global. So firstly, I'd like to explain our basic concept on carbon neutrality. And JAMA and the JAMA member company, or JAMA announced our commitment for the carbon neutrality, and we will so make maximum effort toward carbon neutrality by 2050. It was announced 2 years ago. And our goal is carbon neutrality, and it is essential to understand the issue correctly. That's why we are now having this event. And the life cycle assessment perspective is necessary, and also energy policy and energy decarbonization are indispensable base for our journey toward carbon neutrality. And it is the consumer who choose the vehicles. We believe that it is important to maintain diverse choices for diverse customers. As we are providing vehicle to more than 200 countries, our customers are really unique and diversified. As we don't have a silver bullet now, so we need to expand choices for further and based on technological neutral principle. And the one size of solution does not fit for all customers across the globe. And the region by region, a desirable pathway toward carbon neutrality is different, as energy and the relevant situation are divergent, with not only wealthy city dwellers, but also not so rich people in tough environment condition. We should work together. So we like to ensure mobility for all, and and no one left behind principle is important. And so this kind of our position is quite similar to OICA's position. So as Yves-san explained, as a member of OICA, JAMA fully endorsed the position paper of OICA. And in that OICA's position paper, our 2050 carbon neutral scenario analysis is cited as one of evidence. So I'd like to explain our scenario analysis accordingly. So maybe skip a little bit. And this is an example of regional differences in EU's vehicle fleet growth from 2020 to 2050. And not so clear. And actually so vertical axis show the number of in-use bhikkhu per 1,000 people. And so horizontal axis shows the per capita GDP. And the white circle show the situation at 2020, and the black is 2050. And from left to right, so as per capita GDP increase toward 2050, the number of car in per 1,000 people increase. So especially in emerging economy in Africa, India, ASEAN, and so on. And on the contrary, that situation in developed economy like US, Japan, Europe, and the top right-hand side, almost stable. And so situation is quite different. And also the regional difference in energy mix is also significant. On the right-hand side top, you can see the situation in Japan. And the green is renewable energy, and the pink is nuclear, and the blue is hydrogen, and the red is biomass, and orange is fossil fuel with CCS. And from 2020 to 2050, the energy mix will change. And this is assuming very aggressive decarbonization policy. But renewable energy resources, very different region by region, and some region can use, but some region cannot use so much, and such a difference exists. And so to understand such a situation, and we think we need to take into account such a different circumstances between developed and emerging economy. And we have commissioned the Institute of Energy Economics Japan to analyze 3 scenarios in addition to BAU scenario. At the center box, at the bottom of the box, so you can see the scenarios 3. It's a net zero emission scenario, which assuming 100% BEV fuel cell vehicle sales in 2050, the worldwide and advanced economy and emerging economy also. But as battery electric vehicle is quite expensive now and likely to remain expensive for foreseeable future, so we think other option or scenario with lower share of battery electric vehicle should be analyzed. Then we put in the case of for emerging economies, the 50% BEV FSEV share in 2050 case is a scenario 2, and also 25% BEV FSEV case is a scenario 1. And also at the same time, we think the carbon neutral fuel could be supplied in the future. And based on the estimation of International Energy Agency, and we think the around 10 to 50% of 2020 total fossil fuel consumption by road transport sector will be supplied by biofuel, and additional 15% could be supplied as a kind of form of synthetic fuel. As the aviation sector needs huge amount of synthetic fuel for 2050 to decarbonize their emissions. To produce synthetic fuel for aviation as a byproduct, and the gasoline and diesel portion produced at the same time. So we count the volume of byproduct gasoline and diesel, and then come up, and it would be around 15 to 20% and so on. So then we set these 3 scenarios, and very different BEV FSEV share in emerging economies. And this is a result of the carbon dioxide emission And the vertical axis shows the carbon dioxide emission, and the horizontal is a year. From 2020 to 2050, the black line is a BAO, and it seems to be flat. But all three cases, and the blue, green, orange one, will be fall by more than around 50%. It's so in the margin of IPCC 1.5 scenario, and the minus 42 and minus 68% comparing to 2020 level. And so in all scenario, we can see the IPCC 1.5 climate, compatible reduction could be possible. And in case of advanced economy, and for Europe, left-hand side, and Japan, all three scenario could reach to carbon neutral level in 2050. So not only BEV usage, but also the mix of electrification technology with carbon neutral fuel could reduce significantly. And this is the case for emerging economy, and the left-hand side is ASEAN, and the right-hand side is India. As economy will grow significantly toward 2050, and the population also increase, the total volume of passenger car and the commercial vehicle increase significantly. So BAU emission increase significantly, but the all three scenario can reduce the total volume, not only limit, but can reduce the emissions. And if we can increase the synthetic fuel volume a little bit to the extent we can reasonably foresee, then each region can also reach the range of IPCC 1.5 reduction level, and also in the case of India, IPCC 2.0 reduction level. Then all scenario can in line with the 1.5 degree scenario. So then our summary of this study is findings show that the study's three scenario, excluding BAU, demonstrate the potential for global carbon dioxide emission reduction in automotive sector to be in line with IPCC's 2050 1.5 degree climate scenario. And actually, the IEA's NZT, rapid increase of battery electric vehicle is premised on one pathway toward carbon neutrality. But JAMA study confirmed that there are other pathways comprising of a wide variety of electrified vehicles, including hybrid and plug-in hybrid, and the use of carbon neutral fuel. And for advanced economy, the study three scenario demonstrate potential in the carbon neutrality level reduction in automotive transport by 2050. But to be completely neutral or carbon neutral, we should think about not only decarbonized electricity, but also the supply of carbon neutral fuel for in-use vehicle fleet. Some of internal combustion engine fleet will remain in 2050. Also for emerging economy, also many years growing and increasing the volume significantly, but they can reduce the emission and in line with IPCC 1.5 and 2 degree climate scenario. And our resolution is JAMA member company together with their global stakeholder will make maximum effort for carbon neutrality by 2050 by developing technologies and to further reduce automotive carbon dioxide emissions so that they can provide optimal choices for consumers in country region worldwide. That result of our scenario analysis, you can find all, so in total 150 page assessment slides on our JAMA website. And so actually back to this slide. And so based on this quantitative scenario analysis, JAMA believe that there's potential not only for 100% BEVs, but also for a wide variety of electrified vehicles, including hybrid and plug-in, and the use of carbon neutral fuel for global carbon dioxide emission reduction in the transport sector to be in line with 1.5 scenarios. In such cases, but its own challenges. And in case of battery electric vehicle, cost reduction and infrastructure and decarbonizing the electricity and so on. And for the carbon neutral fuel and cost reduction and the increased supply and so on. So the automotive industry need to work together with all stakeholders to solve these challenges, such as increasing renewable energy or developing charging and hydrogen refueling infrastructure, and so developing a carbon neutral fuel supply system and so on. That's the current our view on the carbon neutrality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aiba-san. So now let's move on to the panel discussion. So all the speakers, could you please move up to the stage? Paulina-san here, and then Akimoto-san here, and Aiba-san there. And we have also Eve via online. Okay. Thank you very much. Having listened to all the presentations, first we have had two presentations from academia side or scientific side, and two presentations from industry side, and very much motivated by consumer-driven perspectives. So first, I'd like to give a floor to Aiba-san and Eve, if possible. Your, how can I say, question and comments to the presentation by scientific community by Paulina and Akimoto-san. Aiba-san, you first.
Thank you very much. And actually, so I really would like to thank you, Paulina-san and Keigo. And so I learned a lot today. And as a business, we are just seeing very short term and very real situation in automotive sector, but the Paulina-san gave us very comprehensive view in total, transport sectors, emission reduction, and also the including aviation and shipping also. Such a wide view, and is quite informative for us. And also the demand side measure seem to be very interesting, and also we think low GHG, hydrogen and so on, would be the potential. But so maybe if I make some comment or question and to that analysis, and actually we see very rapid development of green hydrogen recently, and many countries are announcing very ambitious green hydrogen production plan, including United States. And recently the new Inflation Reduction Act has a very significant subsidy to hydrogen. And so now the US government has very ambitious target, and green hydrogen could be less than a little bit $1 per kilogram around 2030 and so on. So such kind of maybe latest development may not be included. So this kind of scientific analysis, because these analysis are based on the peer-reviewed scientific journals, so on. And then maybe I like to ask some comment on the such kind how from the scientific world see the current very rapid change or latest development in new technology.
Okay, thank you very much. And Eve, do you have any additional comments or questions to Paulina or Keigo?
I don't really have new questions. Just what I remarked from the scientific presentations is that my impression is that we are all on the same wavelength. Namely, there are pros and cons in each approach, and again, we are all saying the same thing as I said earlier on. It will not be a one-size-fits-all situation. Depending on the country, depending on the markets, depending on the economic situation, depending on the geographics, etc., one solution may be privileged over the other. But even in individual markets, it will most likely not be full electric or full alternative fuels. It will more be, I believe, some kind of combination of different technologies. Or let me rephrase that. It is not that it will be, but unfortunately, it should be. And in some cases, political decisions in one direction have already been taken in some regions of the world. And is it really the best approach? I'm not sure. Maybe it is. I simply don't know the answer. And I think that no one really has the answer, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Eve. So now let's turn to Paulina and Keigo. So Paulina, you first. And also you could comment on the presentation by industry side.
So I'll start with the question about hydrogen. So the U.S. has set up a target of $1 per kilogram, and there are significant incentives in the IRA for it. The interest in the U.S. is primarily on long distance, for the transportation sector is long distance and shipping and aviation. And a lot of the hydrogen interest is for industrial decarbonization. I think like for light duty transport, most of the incentives really are for electrification. And so there's definitely context where that might not be the case, but the issue so if you're doing green hydrogen relies on electricity, right? So if you're doing green hydrogen, if you're doing electricity to green hydrogen to electricity, that's an extra step with an efficiency loss than if you're doing electricity to the battery electric vehicles. And in terms of the emissions, it might not change the emissions on a life cycle basis, but in some places, like we're talking about decarbonizing and relying on electricity and electrification, not just for transport, but a lot of other things, is a massive growth in demand for electricity. And so any savings in any efficiency improvements that limit the need for electricity can be important in some areas. So I think that's why in the US, definitely, and I think in Europe as well, electrification. I do want to know that we have a model for the US, the energy system model, and we have run some net zero by 2050 scenarios, and plug-in hybrids are very dominant for the last 10 to 15 years, up to like 2035, the period between 2035 and 2050. So it isn't just battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, because the infrastructure for full electrification isn't there. So plug-in hybrids can really help with that transition. Oh, and then I just wanted to comment on biofuels in Brazil. Biofuels dominate in Brazil, but that's because the government decided that that's what they were going to push. And like the support for biofuels from the government drives the decisions in Brazil, right? So they decided in the early 2000s that they were going to pursue. In the early 2000s, everyone was really interested in biofuels, and Brazil went all in and made massive investments on biofuels. And there you can see, I think there is an example there of lock-in decisions, right? Of they bet big and they're not going to give up those investments. And then I did have a question, and I don't remember who of the two of you mentioned it. It was about consumers having like the freedom to choose whatever they want. And in that case, what is the role of policy? Because California has announced a ban on IC engines by 2035, which means consumers are not deciding. That's just, there's not going to be an option. And so I was just wondering what the automotive manufacturers see about that.
Okay, good question. So perhaps Iverson, you'd like to answer to that question?
Thank you very much. I think, but actually the automobile is used by consumers. And so then if consumers are forced to buy something they doesn't want to buy, and they may use the current vehicle or inefficient vehicle longer, and so that kind of situation continue. And actually, as economists like market mechanisms, because the flexibility of option may reduce the cost of reduction, and the social cost of reduction would be minimized. If you so maybe technology standard like policy just to stick to the one single solution, it may not induce optimal outcome or efficient outcome. So then also now we have future uncertainty, and actually battery can be improved, and but so cost would be now, as Ibusan mentioned, lithium cost is increased by more than 7 times compared to the first quarter of this year. And maybe if we that cost of lithium compared to 2 years ago, maybe it will be more than 10 times. And such kind of cost hike seem to remain as supply capacity is now overwhelmed by the demand. And to do that, as Ibusan explained, more than 300 new mines need to be developed. It takes time, actually more than 10 years and so on. So if the maybe cost would be higher for the battery electric vehicle. And such kind of situation may happen. It's very difficult to foresee. So then maybe we should have variety of options to overcome such kind of situation. And the plug-in hybrid, as you mentioned, is very good one of solution. At the battery size of plug-in hybrid, maybe the 1/4, maybe 1/8 of compared to battery electric vehicle. So if we need to minimize the battery resources, maybe plug-in hybrid is also very good option. And usually the normal people just travel 100 kilometers a day. And then maybe plug-in hybrid can cover such distance. But people doesn't want to buy just this EV, just can travel 100 kilometers. They prefer more than 500 kilometers and so on. So we need to put very big battery in the battery electric vehicle. But in reality, usually just 100 kilometers is used, but only once a week or month, so they travel 500. So in that sense, 80%, around 80% of battery in battery electric vehicle is not used. Just very heavy weight is traveled by the additional energy, and it may seem to be very wasteful. And also as Akimoto-san mentioned, the weight of battery electric vehicle is heavier than normal car, and where the road and tire and so on. So then maybe also anyway, maybe flexibility or variety of choice is quite important to overcome challenge.
Paulina?
Yeah, so I mean the battery is used. So I have both an electric, like battery electric and a plug-in electric. And we just use we don't drive that far, and the battery electric has a range of like 250 miles. We still use the battery to its full. We just charge less often. So it's not like we're charging and wasting that energy. So the idea of you added weight, but it's not wasted energy. You just it allows me to charge only once a week, whereas my plug-in hybrid I have to charge every couple of days, right? So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Pap. So now, let's move on to Akimoto-san. Do you have any comment about presentation from industry side?
Yeah, but no, but I had very I had a very really sympathy with the two presentation, particularly from OICAR. Electrification will play a leading role in transition, but it is probably not the most appropriate single technology for all nations. This is our analysis also says a similar situation, and Iva-san also present several kinds of vehicle technologies can be estimated, but particularly different conditions across regions. So our analysis also showed a similar situation.
Yeah, and interestingly, we have heard three presentations from Akimoto-san and then Iva-san and then Eve. And then by accident or so, I don't know, but the conclusion is very much similar. That is, we need to have a diversity of options, and also the most suitable option could be different across countries, depending on geographic situation or say endowment of natural resources and so on. And in addition, I think one thing we need to bear in mind is critical minerals for the of which demand will rapidly increasing because of penetration of renewables and also the intermittent renewables and electric vehicles. And the Paulina, you said we need to address say recycling or say finding alternative materials or the material efficiency and so on. But given the massive volume of demand for critical minerals, and also given the fact that quite often that critical mineral is located in limited number of countries, and that could have some geopolitical implications. We are now talking about, exit from dependence on Russian energy, but the same thing might happen for critical minerals. So that kind of consideration is the embedded in the IPCC analysis when you drafted chapter 10.
And there's a box on critical materials in the chat. There's a discussion about critical materials in the chapter. From the engineering point of view, a lot of those things are manageable. The investments need to be done now because demand is going to grow. And so we need to be prepared to build the 300 mines. I think recycling has a lot of potential because once the vehicles, you actually don't want to throw those batteries at the end of their life. So I think later I think the investments on recycling technology, both at the research and the development level have to start happening now. So they're available, just like CDR, right? It's not like we have carbon dioxide removal now available. We need to invest in it so that we can do all these things. The similar with and that technology. But I'm not a mineral expert, so I think this is what we discuss in the IPCC.
Yeah. And perhaps another thing we need to bear in mind is if we significantly increase the mining of such critical minerals, the labor condition of that mines needs to be also we need to be attentive about our labor condition because there is an initiative that extracting industry, the initiatives that is to secure the good labor for mining condition or extraction activities. And not all the, mineral resource, critical mineral producing countries are, good in labor condition or labor environment. So we need to also be careful about that. So now,
Can I just say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so cobalt is a big concern,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of work on development of cobalt-free batteries. But the concern of national security is in the US is so big that it's actually part of the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
So the electric vehicles on the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a credit for up to $7,500 for new vehicles. But to qualify for the credit, half of the credit is dependent on sourcing the materials in the battery from countries with free trade agreements with the US, and half of it is dependent on the batteries being assembled in the US.
I see.
So the US sees this as a concern, and it has put policies in place to support the development of better, like different diversified supply options.
I see. So that a production condition of that material would be also considered in application of the Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. The Iverson, I think, the Paulina mentioned about the cost reduction challenges of the synthetic fuels and also hydrogen and so on. So could you please briefly comment on the prospect of the cost reduction of those alternative mode of decarbonization technologies?
Thank you very much. And as I already mentioned, the green hydrogen costs may be lower in the future. And that's synthetic fuel, and the cost of synthetic fuel is composed of cost of renewable energy and the green hydrogen and the carbon dioxide. Actually, so the renewable energy cost is very low in some region of the world, maybe 2 cents or 3 cents. And if the 80% of synthetic fuel cost is composed of green hydrogen, green hydrogen is less than $1 or $2, and it may result in just maybe $1 or $2 per liter in the synthetic fuel cost, and maybe depending on the carbon dioxide cost, and maybe the direct air capture cost is now really expensive. But from the biofuel production process, we can use some methane gas, and then cheap carbon dioxide could be extracted from the second generation biofuel production process. So then it may be cheaper in the future. So then there are potential to cost reduction, and they could be competitive. And then some company are now constructing some commercial scale plant. So we need to see the development, but maybe by the mid 2020s, or maybe last half of 2020, we may see more concrete option.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we tend to consider only cost, but what is also important is utility and also convenience for the final consumers, because the automobile companies must consider the utility and convenience for their customers. So cost is one factor, but not only cost, but the utility and the convenience also need to be compared across various low carbon decarbonization options. So we are running out of time. So I think it is time to conclude, but I think if I can summarize this session, first of all, electric vehicle is definitely a promising option, and its cost is decreasing. And we are looking forward to having more, say, cheaper and also convenient and also useful EV technologies. But having listened to several presentations, EV will not be the single answer, because what we are aiming at is decarbonization of the transport sector, and EV is one of the means. So if other means are suitable for certain country or certain situation, then we could also utilize those options. And I think that combination of various options could be different across countries, as pointed out by Iva-san and Eve as well. And perhaps I think technology neutral approach could be very much, how can I say, logical and pragmatic approach for addressing climate change problems. And at the end of the day, if EV becomes the cheapest and most convenient and most the biggest utility for the final consumer, then EV will be the winner. But in certain cases that may not be the case. So let's see the very much exciting process from now to 2030 and beyond. And ultimately, we need to achieve carbon neutrality and in the economy as a whole. And of course, transport alone may not be able to achieve complete carbon neutrality. So that needs to be supported by CDR or other offsetting, options. So that is what I could summarize this session. And again, thank you very much for your participation. And thank you very much for audience for attending the very best last session of Japanese Pavilion. Thank you very much. And give a thunderous applause to all the panelists. And Eve, thank you, Eve, for your participation. Thank you.